Story 1. I was a passenger in a car, and looking out the window, the shadows from the trees would morph, grow, and move. It was kind of scary, but I enjoyed it. Felt like being on drugs before I ever tried them. Don't do drugs. Get some sleep. Story 2. After about 70 hours, it becomes very disorienting and rational thinking slows considerably. The hallucinations are not realistic. They are more like gaps in your vision shaped like objects. You might see a silhouette at a distance or briefly around a corner. It is very difficult to function in this state. I would not recommend it. Story 3. A friend of mine took a painting job inside a large commercial building. He stayed there for 6 days straight, smoking crystal meth and painting to meet his deadline and avoid hiring a crew. On the 6th day, he believed the building was on fire. He ran into the lobby, pulling people into the street and yelling for them to call 911. Firefighters arrived and could not find a fire because there was none. He was hallucinating. Story 4. During exam week, I pulled 3 all-nighters in the library between tests. The library was open 24 hours, so I would stay up all night making note cards and then go take an exam during the day. I lived off campus and did not want to spend the gas money. I would go to the most isolated area, but the library was mostly cleared out by midnight. I began seeing glimpses of people and thought students were messing with me, but no one was on that floor. I thought the lights had gone out and that a sensor was malfunctioning, so I started jumping around to reactivate them, but the lights were lit the whole time. Story 5. I am a former addict. After a 3-day methamphetamine binge, I was driving home and stopped at a McDonald's drive-thru for food. When they asked for my order, I kept replying McChicken meal, please, in my head. After they asked again, I thought, can't you fucking hear me? McChicken meal. And then realized I had not actually spoken aloud. I had only been replying in my head. Story 6. I went roughly 4 days with only 5 hours of sleep total. I could function, but I constantly heard people mumbling right next to me. Story 7. Yes, I saw shadow creatures and I thought they were out to get me. Story 8. I had really bad sleep problems for years. At one point, I went to a party after being awake for 36 hours when I arrived. I did not hallucinate at the time despite being unable to sleep, but when I finally slept, I got the rest I needed. The main problem was falling asleep. For me, stress and lack of sleep trigger sleep paralysis and strange dreams in which I am lying down, cannot see clearly, and cannot get up because everything is blurry and spinning. It made me wake in cold sweats. I remember waking and falling back asleep so many times because I was too exhausted to keep my eyes open. I called my mom crying because I did not know whether I was awake. I am better now. Story 9. I spent a few weeks getting only about 4 hours of sleep a night. I began seeing, from the corners of my eyes, black shapes falling from the ceiling that looked like giant spiders. I made sure I got enough sleep. Story 10. I had not slept for about 72 hours when I went to the emergency room. The doctor gave me Ambien. I went home, got into bed, and took one. A few minutes later, the floor was covered in water. The walls seemed to be melting, and the rain on the windows looked like it was marching in formation. I have never known whether that was sleep deprivation or the effects of Ambien. I have never taken another. Story 11. I suffered from severe insomnia about 12 years ago. I was taking Lexapro and one of the side effects is insomnia. At the time, that was not well documented. I tried everything from Ambien to alcohol to try to sleep. I would usually get about a 3-hour nap at most before waking again. I would go 3 to 5 days without sleeping. Eventually, I reached the point of desperation and started using recreational substances to try to knock myself out. There were several hallucinations, but one stands out as truly terrible. I was on the 6th day without sleeping at least 5 hours. I was lying in bed when a friend came in to talk with me. We had many great conversations since our friendship began, but had not talked in a while at that point. I told him how badly I was struggling and that, honestly, killing myself would have been easier. He said he had felt the same way many times, but that it was a terrible idea and he knew how badly it had messed up his family. When I looked at him, he was a bloody mess on the side of his face. His jaw ripped apart and teeth missing, but talking to me as if nothing was wrong. He had been dead for a few years at that point. He had died by suicide, shooting himself in his garage after years of substance abuse. I had just had a 3-hour conversation with a hallucination of a dead friend. I ended up switching medications to Celexa, and my sleep problems disappeared within a month. So, if you are having sleep problems, please see a doctor. It is a dark place that nearly took me. Story 12. While deployed overseas, I became sleep-deprived for a period of time. I began hallucinating date palm trees moving across the road, like the walking trees in The Lord of the Rings. Story 13. I stayed up for 3 days straight when I was 17. On the third day, I kept hearing people call my name as if they wanted to ask me a question. It did not help that I thought it would be a good idea to go to school. Several times I bolted upright and looked around to see who wanted my attention, only to see fellow students huddled over their work. As the day went on, my friends grew a little worried about how strangely I was acting. I walked home after school, listening to my headphones as usual, but I still heard someone call my name. The music made it worse. What I heard was already muffled, and the song in my ears only obscured it further. When I got home, I told my mother I was not feeling well, went to my room, and fell asleep at 4 in the afternoon. As I nodded off, I heard the voice calling again and jerked awake. This happened a couple of times until I convinced myself I had already told my mother I was sick, and if she needed me, she could come get me. I finally slept until 2 a.m., woke to use the bathroom, and went back to sleep until 9 a.m. the next day. I was an idiot. Story 14. Fucking shadow people. It's bad for you, you shouldn't do it. But if you're asking this question, you're the type who will try. Remember, it's not real, so relax. Go to sleep. Story 15. Okay, story time. My mother suffers from narcolepsy, and one of the first treatments they gave her basically drove her completely insane. She was awake for 5 days. One day, I walked into her bedroom and heard her talking to someone. I looked around and asked her who she was talking to. She told me it was the lady in red. There was no one else in the room. I asked where the lady was, and she said the lady sits on the dresser and talks to her all night. I was about 14 at the time, so I went to the kitchen and hid her medicine until my stepfather got home and could take her to the hospital. The emergency room doctor was very upset about the medication her doctor had given her. It was far too much. She stopped seeing the lady after they got everything straightened out. Thank you for your thoughtful and kind wishes for my mother. She has good days and bad days. Her narcolepsy is caused by a small tumor on her brain. She gets better when it shrinks and worse when it grows. It sometimes reaches about the size of a dime. They cannot remove it but are trying to keep it small with medication. Story 16. No sleep for 4 days straight really messes with your head. All sounds were heightened, and I was sure I could hear all my neighbors talking about me. Story 17. I didn't have visual hallucinations, but I had auditory hallucinations. The sounds were like music, pleasant but frightening because I didn't know where they came from. Story 18. After 30 hours, I started seeing insects on the walls and on my desk that were not there. It might have been the light or paranoia because I am massively afraid of spiders. I made it to 50 hours without seeing anything else. Story 19. It's almost a regular occurrence for me now because I suffer from insomnia. I experience 3 types of hallucinations. 1. Funny, useless things I know are fake. 2. Things that could be real or not. 3. Extremely scary and traumatic things I know are fake but that rattle me every time. They usually appear in that order. Pro tip. If you are experiencing visual hallucinations and are not sure whether something is real, take a photo with your smartphone and look at it. It is very unlikely you will hallucinate the same thing twice in exactly the same position. It works for me at least. Edit. Holy son of a biscuit eater. This blew up in a matter of hours. I received several genuinely interested questions and I will try to answer them. I have already replied to most and will continue later because I am awake at an hour I should not be. I will try to get some more shut-eye. Imagine the irony. Story 20. In training to join the British Army Infantry, everyone does a defense exercise. You deploy onto the area and then spend 72 hours digging trenches without sleep or rest. It is a combination of sleep deprivation and exhaustion. Although I never hallucinated, I passed out onto another soldier and saw some men experience extreme disorientation. One man walked into a foggy field and was missing for hours. When he realized he was lost, he lay on the ground, switched radio channels and said hello, hoping someone would hear him. Another man, a Welsh speaker, lost the ability to distinguish between the two languages. He spoke to you in Welsh, then got annoyed when you did not understand him, believing he was speaking perfect English. Story 21. I thought a girl was tipping over in her chair, so I rushed over and pushed her to safety. Sorry, girl from my public speaking class, circa 1999. Story 22. Once in my early 20s, I took acid and did not sleep at all for about 3 days. On the third day, a door told me to go fuck myself, and I was not sure whether it was from the drugs building up or from severe fatigue. Edit. There is some confusion about the wording. This was not a single dose but multiple redoses over the course of 3 days with diminishing returns. Story 23. I stayed awake for 2.5 days. I saw a man walk through my apartment, but no one was there. Story 24. Please do not do this to yourself. Believe me, if you do, you will start seeing crap. It is strange and mentally burdensome. Story 25. I have a cautionary tale. I was 19 and had just been sent to Japan with the United States Air Force. A little background. Japan is famous for its car culture and inspires hundreds of thousands of people. Ebisu Circuit, a famous multi-track venue, holds a festival several times a year called Drift Matsuri. The event draws drivers and spectators from around the world. Many visitors fly in and buy cars for the week and drive continuously for 72 hours. I cannot remember what kept me up all night, maybe gaming or studying, but it was Drift Matsuri weekend at Ebisu, and Adam LZ, a well-known drift YouTuber, was going to be there with Taylor Ray. With Alicia only about 150 kilometers away, I started my car and set out on the journey. I had never used the toll roads before, so I ended up driving 7 hours instead of the predicted 3. I had also recently been assigned to Japan and had not yet taken my car on a proper drive through the countryside. So I drove on single-lane roads past rice paddies and small mountain villages. Not exactly the place my drift car was suited for, but it was exciting. I arrived at the circuit around 3:30, met the crew, hung out, and practiced on the skid pad. I had to return to base before midnight, so I stayed about an hour and then headed home. By that point, I had been awake for nearly 64 hours. I had no real problems until about 10:30 p.m., back in the dense concrete jungle of Tokyo. I experienced a few hallucinations, but the worst was driving my car into a hole in the middle of the road. I was out for at least a few seconds, probably asleep. I was fortunate the roads were nearly empty, but I could have died that night and everyone around me was in danger. Do yourself and everyone around you a favor. Do not drive tired. Story 26. Visions of people existing where they should not be, like walking on rafters and ducks high above factory floors. Memory loss and an irritability you have never experienced. Pain and losing time, an hour here and an hour there. I have gone week-long stretches where I averaged between 10 and 15 hours of sleep over a 7-day period so often that it became normal. It was not that the stretches themselves were long, maybe 20 hours at most, but there was no deep sleep during the downtime. Without deep sleep, you begin to go mad, and I have come close to going over the edge. Story 27. Oh, you mean the shadow people? Yes, I am acquainted with them. Insomnia, worsened by hypomania, meant I would frequently sleep 2 hours or less a night. It was not uncommon to be awake for 72 hours straight. Generally, it is the sensation that someone just walked past the edges of your peripheral vision. But when you turn to get a better look, there is nothing there. I have also seen black masses skitter across the floor. Story 28. In college, we had a major group project. We stayed on campus for 48 hours without sleep. By the end, we were all hallucinating while writing our code. At one point, I remember thinking my code was talking, but the music had just started playing. Story 29. A man I knew did not sleep for a week because apparently methamphetamine does that to a person. He quit using it when he stopped to let a dragon cross the street. Story 30. I once worked a 17-hour shift. I was working an event for a cocktail company. Work started early in the morning, and I drove about 30 minutes to their company premises. The event was a private wedding in a field, and we were a pop-up cocktail bar. After loading all the fresh fruit onto the van, I was driven about an hour to the venue, where we unloaded. We had to set up a metal bar, stock it, prepare ingredients, decorate it, and get all the glassware ready. People started ordering drinks at 3 p.m., and it went on late into the night. Although we had breaks, we were on our feet the whole time. The person in charge of our van had forgotten to pack a light, so we loaded the van back up in the dark, almost ran over one of the guests who had passed out in the middle of the field, and I cut myself pretty badly. We got back to the barn storage at about 4 a.m., and I had to drive home. I was so worn out I was seeing cows everywhere. I kept having to stop for cows on the road or in the bushes, but none of it was real. When I eventually reached lighter roads, I stopped seeing things that were not there, and I will never put myself through something so dangerous again. Story 31. Earlier this year, I took my partner to the emergency room because he was hallucinating. He was exhausted and dehydrated, and experienced snippets of conversation with people who were not in the room. On the way there, he asked me, "Where did they go?" I asked, "Who?" He replied, "Your friends who were in the back seat. There was no one with us." Story 32. Yes, it isn't fun. In my case, I could no longer tell what was real and what wasn't. I was seeing terrifying images and felt nauseous. I thanked the heavens once I finally fell asleep. Story 33. There were two incidents in which I experienced auditory hallucinations. 1. I took a child development class my junior year of high school and had to bring home a plastic baby. It needed care at night rather than during the day, and during the day I had homework, chores, and care responsibilities for my siblings and grandparents. I think I got less than 2 hours of sleep over 2 or 3 days and kept dreaming that the baby was crying. When I woke, I could not tell whether the baby was actually crying or if it was in my dream. Terrified me. One night, my grandmother found me crying and holding the plastic baby. She asked what was wrong, and I said my brother, who was a baby then, was crying because I had hurt him and I did not know how to help him. I hallucinated that the plastic baby was my brother and that he was crying in pain, even though the plastic baby was not crying. After I returned the baby, I told my mother and her husband because I was very scared. They said this was normal once you have children. I decided I would never have children if it would make me so sleep-deprived and unstable. I wanted kids, but I did not want to be a danger to myself for them. 2. The second incident was the summer of my sophomore year of high school. I stayed up extremely late and, although I did not feel tired, my brain clearly was. Suddenly, I heard heavy breathing outside my bedroom door, followed by a cry for help, asking someone to please help and saying someone was after them. The breathing was heavy and the voice sounded strangled, as if struggling to breathe. I was frightened because I thought it might be my grandmother, who slept next to my room. It did not sound like her, but I woke her to check and she said everything was fine. Story 34. I went through a lot with an abusive ex. He kept me awake for long periods, and when I finally slept I had nightmares. I began hallucinating spiders on the ceiling, and it felt like hands were touching me. The hallucinations lasted for days and wrecked the little sleep I managed to get. I was diagnosed with early psychosis and schizotypal disorder, mostly because I did not tell them about my ex, so they could not diagnose post-traumatic stress disorder. They prescribed medication for the psychosis, but because my symptoms were caused by the abuse and sleep deprivation, the medication did not help and I only had to cope with being medicated. Story 35. Watch out for the shadow people. They become very obnoxious after 72 hours and extremely brutal near 100 hours. Story 36. When I start hearing music coming from my floor fan, it's time to get some sleep. Story 37. During my time in the military, I worked 126 hours over 7 days in full gear, standing or walking for most of each 18-hour day. By the 6th day, I was falling asleep while walking and seeing people in my peripheral vision. I would look quickly and they were not there. Then I would see someone again. We just called them shadow people. Anyway, it was awful. Story 38. I was driving down the road when mailboxes and light posts turned into people and leaped in front of my car. I was lucky not to crash. Do not do that. Story 39. The day after I brought my son home from the hospital, the striped curtains in my room were billowing, but there was no breeze. The stripes were just shimmying and swaying. I had had 8, maybe 9 hours of sleep total in 4 days and was running on pure adrenaline and narcotics after a cesarean section. I do not recommend it. Story 40. Yes. When I was manic, it was not fun. It was a frightening experience every time. Story 41. I have not had hallucinations, but I have had many dreams. When I wake in the middle of the night, I hear voices in my head talking to me, but I cannot make out what they are saying. Story 42. I hope you have gone to sleep by now. Many of my very long days have been anxiety-driven. I remember looking down at my fingers and, although I knew they were fingers, being convinced they were spider legs. They are long for my size but proportioned so you would not immediately notice. They do not look like spider legs. Story 43. I suffer from bipolar disorder. Once, during a manic episode, I thought people were in my house who were not there. I couldn't sleep with my lamp off because I began seeing shadow people. I was awake for several nights. It was very frightening. Story 44. It was not fun while I was driving. I have been there and do not know how I got home. Story 45. I mistook a kettle for a loaf of bread and tried to put it in the toaster. Story 46. No, but I had a fever high enough to hallucinate twice as a child. Scary shit. Story 47. When I was in 9th grade, my friends and I watched an episode of Family Guy where Peter, Joe, and Quagmire try to see who can stay awake the longest. We were foolish and tried it. We stayed awake for 3 days straight, and I swore to God I thought my head had fallen off. I also thought my friend was Sasquatch trying to eat us. I freaked out so much that I had to use a bag to stop hyperventilating. He is 6 feet 1 inch tall, weighs 250 pounds, and is extremely hairy, to the point where brushing your arm against him could exfoliate your skin and give you a carpet burn at the same time. Story 48. Years ago, I traveled on my own for the first time. I took the bus from my city to one of the airports in London. It took almost a whole day because of the connections, and then I had to wait at the airport until the next day for my flight. I ended up trying to sleep on the floor because I was too broke for a hotel, so I did not get much sleep. The next day, I got on my flight and was dozing in and out of sleep. I hallucinated a Shiba Inu on the plane and thought, oh, that is strange that they are letting a dog walk about the cabin. Then I saw a cow on the wing. I thought, oh, that is really strange. Story 49. I had an epic series of plane, train, and subway cancellations that left me awake and in transit for 3.5 days. A big storm over the Midwest knocked out everything I needed to get home. By the end of the 3rd day, my vision was full of shimmering gold hexagons, kind of like when you rub your eyes or squeeze them closed. Hard. It was only in the lower half of my visual field and would not go away. I heard a roar of voices and laughter, as if thousands of people were around me, but it was actually just a couple of sleepy older people near me at the station. I phoned my mother and told her. She said I was exhausted, and the visual disturbance stopped for a while. Story 50. I was driving to Denver from St. Louis, and we decided to start driving at night. A couple of hours later, we were in central Kansas, driving through a thunderstorm with extremely low visibility. I was so tired that I kept thinking we were continually driving under an overpass. Time and again, I would look up and expect another one. Felt so freaky. Finally, I was able to pull over at a gas station and get a couple of hours of rest. Story 51. I do not suggest doing this at all. My first experience was more funny than scary. I worked the 3rd shift at a gas station for 6 years. I did not sleep for 3 days because of insomnia. I was so out of it that I imagined a purple unicorn named Hugo in the back office, watching me on the cameras and smoking cigarettes. Hugo would come out and tell me about Philip, a red rhino, taking his business. That is when I knew I needed sleep. Hugo and Philip were cartoonish like characters from Space Jam. Another experience involved seeing black liquid dripping from the faces of people. I always made sure to get enough sleep after that experience. Story 52. When my daughter was born, I experienced what I imagine is pretty standard new parent sleep deprivation. I did not handle it well. Several times, after falling asleep, I woke up not knowing where the baby was and had short panic attacks. One night, the worst, I woke up holding my pillow, thinking I was rocking the baby. My eyes were blurry, but I could see something covering her head, a pillowcase. I could not get it off and began panicking, thinking my baby was suffocating. I ended up ripping my pillow into shreds trying to get my baby out when my wife walked in from the other room, holding the baby, and asked what I was doing. Story 53. Yes. The first 6 months of being a first-time mother to a colicky baby were intense. I thought I saw dark, shadowy figures out of the corner of my eye, and I was very jumpy. I also experienced auditory hallucinations, hearing doors, doorbells, and what I thought were footsteps a couple of times. Fun times. 10 out of 10. Would recommend. Story 54. I worked a few shifts longer than 24 hours for a poor security company. I hallucinated bugs crawling up the walls. That experience was useful, since I had slept almost as little in basic training and was not surprised when under far more stress. Story 55. I told a girl on campus that she had a cute dog. It was a white plastic bag. Story 56. A shadowy figure walking at the edge of my vision and random black blobs. Story 57. While deployed to a combat zone, I thought the truck in front of me was a cheeseburger. I was actually driving and believed it was floating down the road for about 5 minutes. Story 58. I stayed awake in college for about 72 hours finishing an assignment with unreliable group members. I told my roommates I was going to take a quick nap and then go out with them. I never spoke to them and slept for 16 hours after I got home. Story 59. I was convinced someone was at the door and people were walking around my house. I was completely by myself. My stomach noises made my heart stop. I froze and almost stopped breathing because I thought someone was there. Those nights were the scariest of my life. I was afraid to leave my room to use the bathroom at night because I saw shadow people, felt them staring at me, and heard them talking. I had a bad kidney infection which can cause confusion, and I had missed a lot of sleep while working an intense job and living alone in a rough area. I had moved to the city for university and lived in a creepy, cold house with no heating, so the shower was freezing. I could not sleep because I was so afraid of being alone in a house in an area with many break-ins. Story 60. I was undergoing cancer treatment at 15. I didn't truly sleep for several days. I began insisting I could hear the music from Beauty and the Beast coming through the wall next door. They checked several times. There was no music and no one in that room or any other. It drove me crazy for 2 days. Story 61. I started seeing creatures with the body of a spider and the head of a bat running across my living room and up the walls. The doctor gave me sleeping pills the next day. Story 62. I am not sure if this counts, but I have anxiety-induced hallucinations and paranoia when I do not sleep properly. Usually they are sounds, like papers rustling, footsteps, or plates clattering, that convince me I am not alone in my apartment. This is terrifying because an ex stated on separate occasions that he wanted to rape me and that he fantasized about breaking into my house and killing me. The paranoia is bad, but the hallucinations have more than once caused me to stand near my door with a knife in case someone was there to hurt me. It is worth saying this rarely happens when someone else is actually present, especially if I can ask them if they heard the noise and get instant verification that I was only hearing things. Story 63. I stayed awake for about 36 hours straight and then passed out. It was a wild day. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.